Fear is a mirror that smiles back at you. But do you dare to look into it? Hi, Studio Recapped here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called Smile, a 2022 horror film. Spoiler alert is on. Take care. The story revolves around a psychologist named Rose Cotter. She has experienced severe trauma in her past and now works at a psychiatric hospital, despite the low pay. Rose works long, grueling hours, motivated by the belief that she's helping others and saving lives. Throughout the day, she consults with unusual patients, like a man named Carl, who keeps repeating, "We're all going to die." Rose is known for being highly effective in improving her patients' mental health. One day, an emergency patient named Laura Weaver is brought in. Laura has no prior history of mental illness but has been involved in strange incidents over the past week. For instance, a university professor killed himself with a hammer, and Laura was the only witness. Since then, she's been experiencing intense hallucinations, which have worsened her condition. During her consultation, Laura insists that the hospital is not safe for her. She repeatedly emphasizes that she's not crazy but sees horrifying things that no one else can. She describes a grotesque figure with a menacing smile, which sometimes looks like strangers and sometimes like familiar people. On occasion, it even takes the form of her grandfather, who committed suicide in front of her when she was a child. As their conversation progresses, Laura suddenly changes. A mysterious entity, visible only to Laura, attacks her and tries to choke her. Rose immediately calls for emergency help. When she turns back, she sees Laura grinning eerily, holding a shard of a broken vase. Laura uses it to slash her own face and then cuts her throat, killing herself. Even on her corpse, blood forms a sinister smile. After this horrific event, a detective named Joel questions Rose. Joel is an old friend of Rose's and someone she used to be romantically involved with. Rose shares all the details of what happened, but soon after the suicide, strange things start occurring in her own life. Rose begins seeing Laura, still staring at her with that eerie smile. Rose's fiancé, Trevor, believes the trauma of the hospital incident has overwhelmed her and suggests that some rest will help her recover. That evening, Rose and Trevor spend time with Holly, Rose's sister, and her husband. Frustrated and shaken by the day's events, Rose lashes out at Holly, leading to an argument. The next day, Rose obtains Laura's medical report from the hospital staff. Joel visits her to apologize for his interrogation, explaining that it was just part of his job. However, Rose responds coldly. Rose's hallucinations worsen, and she begins to suspect that Carl, like Laura, is smiling at her in a sinister way. The hospital's director advises Rose to take a week off to recover. Later, Rose visits a toy store to buy a toy train as a birthday gift for her nephew. But when she's home alone, her hallucinations intensify. Fearful, she activates her home security system. After the alarm goes off, security officers investigate but find nothing. That same night, Rose's cat goes missing, and despite their efforts, they can't find it. At night, Rose starts having nightmares about her mother's death. She listens to the recording from Laura's suicide and notices that Laura's descriptions of the grotesque smiling faces match the hallucinations Rose is now experiencing. The next day, she visits a psychologist and asks for tranquilizers. The psychologist, after hearing about Rose's experiences, brings up her past trauma and her mother's death. Rose prepares to attend her nephew's birthday party. During the gift unwrapping, her nephew opens Rose's gift and finds the dead body of her missing cat inside the box. Shocked and horrified, Rose tries to convince everyone that she isn't responsible. She yells and cries in a desperate attempt to defend herself, leaving everyone stunned. They believe she's lost her mind. After this incident, Holly refuses to see Rose anymore, and Trevor's behavior toward her changes significantly. He starts to believe that Rose has inherited her mother's mental illness. Rose feels utterly isolated, and even when she tries to share what she's experiencing, Trevor refuses to listen or believe her. Rose reads Laura's testimony, including the story of the university professor who killed himself in front of his students. She visits the professor's wife to ask about his behavior before the suicide. The wife shows her photos of his body and the disturbing drawings he made before his death, all of them depicting the same horrifying smile. Once the wife realizes Rose is afflicted by the same curse, she forces her to leave the house. Rose turns to Joel and begs him to dig up information on several people, including the causes of their deaths and any witnesses. Joel discovers a chilling pattern. All the victims of this sinister entity were witnesses to the suicide of someone who displayed similar symptoms. Ultimately, these victims would kill themselves in horrific ways, transferring the curse to another person. The curse spreads like a chain, passing on to the next witness through the act of a grotesque, smiling suicide. When Rose returns home, she finds Trevor there with her psychologist, which deeply upsets her. Feeling betrayed, she storms out of the house. Seeking comfort, she visits Holly, but Holly confronts her about being unable to move on from their mother's death. Holly claims she has moved past it, insisting their mother was simply mentally ill and nothing more. When Rose shares details about her condition and the horrific things she's seeing, Holly refuses to believe her. Joel continues investigating the chain of suicides and discovers that out of 20 cursed individuals, 19 have killed themselves, passing the curse to someone else. However, one survivor remains, now in prison. Rose and Joel visit the man, who agrees to speak only with Rose. He explains that the demonic entity can be stopped, but only if the cursed individual kills someone in front of a witness. This act transfers the curse to the new witness, breaking the chain for the original victim. Back at home, Rose is visited by her psychologist, who tries to talk to her. During their conversation, Rose's phone rings. To her shock, it's her psychologist on the other end, apologizing for what happened the previous day. Realizing the person in front of her is not real, Rose watches in horror as the psychologist's face twists into a grotesque smile and attempts to strangle her. The hallucination feels so real that Rose begins to spiral into madness. Rose goes to the hospital and stabs Carl repeatedly in front of her boss, believing it will end the curse. However, she quickly realizes it was another hallucination. Snapping back to reality, she finds herself outside the hospital, holding a knife. Her boss, having witnessed her erratic behavior, tries to get her inside for help, but Rose flees after being overwhelmed by terrifying visions. Rose decides to isolate herself at her childhood cabin to avoid harming anyone or transferring the curse to someone else. She only informs Joel of her plan. At the cabin, Rose begins to relive traumatic memories of her mother's death. She sees her younger self as her mother begs for help, but instead of aiding her, Rose runs away. Her mother's ghost asks, "Why didn't you save me?" Rose, tearful, responds, "I was just a child, and I was scared of you." Her mother suddenly morphs into a monstrous figure and lunges at her, trying to strangle her. Rose fights back, realizing the creature exists only in her mind. She sets it on fire, believing she has defeated it, and leaves the cabin to go to Joel's house. At Joel's, she asks him to stay with her forever and apologizes for the past. Joel agrees, but when she looks at him, he's smiling ominously. Terrified, Rose runs away, snapping back to reality. Rose finds herself still standing outside the cabin, realizing she never set it on fire. Joel calls out to her and approaches, but Rose assumes it's another hallucination and retreats inside, locking the door. Once again, the monstrous entity appears, peeling off its own skin in a grotesque display. It forces itself into Rose's body through her mouth as she struggles in vain to resist. Outside, Joel hears Rose screaming and breaks down the door. He finds her dousing herself in gasoline. When she turns to him, her face is twisted into an eerie smile. Without hesitation, she lights a match, setting herself ablaze. Joel watches helplessly as the curse transfers to him, ensuring the sinister cycle continues. To be continued.